I'm 30 years old, and my name is Rebecca. I've been battling a complicated familial situation for a while. I was 20 years old when it all started. Inspired by a therapist who helped me cope with the death of my father, I was a vibrant and optimistic second-year psychology major at the time. I had aspired to become a clinical psychologist since I was a little child. I was fortunate to have wonderful pals, and my academic career was thriving. I even had plans to study abroad the next year since I loved hanging out with my friends. But everything changed when my mother, Helen, 52, developed a serious chronic disease that prevented her from continuing to work. Her joints and muscles were damaged by the sickness, which resulted in ongoing discomfort and a progressive reduction in her range of motion. We were told by the doctors that there was no basic cure for her growing illness. Sarah, my younger sister, was just 15 years old and a high school student at the time. She was full of the usual rebelliousness of adolescence, spending her days playing video games and being gloomy. When Sarah was still a baby, our father had perished in a car accident. Our three-person family has been helping one another ever since. As a legal secretary, our mother had provided for our family, but she was unable to continue working once her sickness struck. I felt compelled to provide for our family as her condition deteriorated. I knew I had to give up my goals as I sat in my little dorm room, looking at a desk cluttered with psychological textbooks. Making that choice was difficult, but there were no other practical choices. Sarah was too young to be expected to take on the care and treatment my mother required on a regular basis. I can still clearly remember the day I went to the administrative office to withdraw from college. I realized that part-time attendance or taking a leave of absence would not be enough to sustain our household financially, but my advisor made a sincere effort to convince me to stay. Our family needed financial help immediately, and waiting was not an option. I left college at the age of 20 and began working full-time. I worked as a receptionist at a small local accounting business for my first job. The pay was small, but steady, and we could save money on rent by returning home to live with my mother and Sarah. The initial months were quite difficult. In favor of a routine of taking phone calls and performing secretarial duties, I had abandoned the engaging lectures and study groups I had experienced in college. I would help my mother get well in the evenings and make sure Sarah didn't fall behind in her coursework. Even though I frequently wondered at night if I had made the proper choice, I was always able to push myself and decide to go on. I used to think that one day Sarah would become self-sufficient, my mother's health would improve, and I could go back to school. I was unable to give up on the idea. Even as that optimism waned with time, the ideal looked more and farther away as the years went by, but I clung to hope despite the fact that I had to face reality. After working as a receptionist for a while, I was promoted to an administrative role, which somewhat raised my pay and enabled me to pay for my mother's medical care, as well as the living expenditures of our family. I ensured that Sarah had all of her school necessities, such as clothing, supplies, and money, for field excursions. The want to offer her the chances I had forfeited was overwhelming me. Through my efforts, Sarah received scholarships to graduate from high school, and my assistants cleared the path for her to enroll in college. She made me feel very proud. Knowing that at least one of our family members will earn a degree was a delight. As my parents had done for me when I did well in school as a youngster, I brought her to an ice cream store to celebrate when she got her admission letter, and her tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. I had temporarily put my aspirations on hold, abandoned my intentions to further my education, and foregone personal leisure and travel in order to fully focus on taking care of my mother and providing for Sarah during that time. Even though I was worn out, I kept telling myself that this was for the family's benefit. When I read posts on social media from my college classmates about their prosperous employment and exciting new lives, it was difficult to avoid feeling jealous or unsatisfied. But there were other happy times. like when my mom had a good day and we could watch old movies together, or when Sarah called from college and talked about her new friends and her high grades. These experiences gave me hope that my sacrifices and hard work had not been in vain. But as time went on, I began to feel less valued and as though people were taking my hardships for granted. My mother needed a lot of attention, even though her condition was stabilized. She frequently complained about how hard her life was, but she seldom ever brought up the sacrifices and hard work I had put in. She would occasionally say harsh things such, "Other daughters would do more for their parents," or "You should be doing better." I pretended not to care that these remarks were painful. In the meanwhile, Sarah's perspective shifted dramatically after she enrolled in college. At first, she would enthusiastically discuss her studies and university happenings over the phone once a week, but her calls became less frequent over time. These days, she rarely inquired about our mother or me, and instead primarily reached out to us when she needed special assistance or financial support. I see Sarah having fun with her new college pals and photos from spring break vacations that are well out of my price range when I check her social media accounts. I felt the distance between us growing every time I saw that, and I had no idea how to close that gap. Sarah exhibited little interest in our mother or me at home, and instead spent much of her time with her high school pals, even when she came home for holidays. But Sarah's college graduation last week marked a sea change. In spite of everything, I was truly proud of her and delighted for her achievement. After months of planning, I chose to give her a straightforward yet elegant watch for her graduation. Although it wasn't particularly eye-catching, I believed it would work well for job interviews. I wanted Sarah to share in the excitement I had when my father gave me my first watch when I was 16. I started crying when Sarah crossed the stage to accept her diploma during the tearful graduation ceremony. But my mother and I were viewed as background characters during the subsequent graduation celebration. Sarah mostly hung out with her new fashionable boyfriend, Wesley, and her college pals. Wesley's icy looks gave us the impression that we were unwanted guests. Sarah brushed me off when I tried to give her the present, claiming she was too busy. Standing there with the gift in my hand, I felt very uncomfortable and depressed. I sat in a corner of the gathering and fought back tears. I heard Sarah and Wesley conversing at that moment. She was expressing to her pals how ashamed she was of her family and how ready she was to leave home and find a new career. She declared that she would never get in touch with us again once she left home because she was sick of us bringing her down. Hearing such icy remarks from my sister, whom I had loved and supported at the cost of my own life, stunned and hurt me. I can still recall all the times I gave her money for college or helped with her studies rather than using it on new clothing or haircuts for myself. I was overcome with an inexplicable wave of emotions. She truly felt that way about us. I questioned her about her remarks the next day in the hopes that she would apologize. Instead, I received scathing criticism. She said that our mother never asked for my life sacrifice and that it was pitiful. She accused me of attempting to make her feel bad and of being envious of her success. Instead of supporting me during our dispute, our mother said I was being theatrical. I should simply be happy for Sarah and let her be, she said. I felt like I was losing my youth at 30, with no degree, a job that was stagnating, and a mother who didn't appreciate me and a sister who hated me. I genuinely believed that I needed to relocate in order to rediscover who I was and take some time to attend to my own needs. But the idea of leaving my mother alone, especially if her health deteriorated, made me feel bad. However, as these thoughts continued to trouble me, I came to the realization that I needed to properly express my concerns to Sarah and my mother. I repeatedly practiced my speech in my mind, making sure to use language that wouldn't come off as accusing. In an attempt to patch things up, I asked Sarah around, She grudgingly agreed when I proposed that we go out to dinner, so I spent the day cleaning the house and preparing our mother's favorite lasagna, in the hopes that a moment of family love would thaw everyone's hearts. But the evening soon took a turn for the worst. First, our mother accused me of attempting to make her feel bad about being ill. "You chose to leave college on your own, didn't you? I never asked you to do so." She went on, "Do you think I wanted to ruin your life by getting sick?" Before mentioning how she had taken care of her ailing father for years without complaining. She refused to listen when I attempted to clarify that I wasn't pointing the finger at her and was only trying to show my appreciation. Although Sarah generally remained mute, claiming that I was being overly sensitive and that she didn't mean it that way, it was obvious from the expression on her face that she took what she had said seriously. She started discussing her accomplishments, degree, employment opportunities, and her intentions to relocate to the city. "What have you done?" she said, glancing at me. "You are a secretary who is over 30 years old and still resides at home." I cried uncontrollably and told her how deeply she had wounded me at that very time. I questioned why she acted as though I was to blame for everything. I was accused by our mother of attempting to incite a fight with Sarah. I responded, "I don't feel the need to become involved, and I won't support you at all from now on. I no longer have to put myself in danger to keep you safe." They said, "Don't talk like that," in response to my comment, which seemed to imply that I was the only one going through hardship. I said, "Looking back over these 9 years, my life has been miserable. I thought there was no use in staying at that point." I left the home, fighting back tears. My chest has never felt so constricted in my life. I'm thinking about what to do next while I'm at my best friend Vanessa's place. One of the few people I've been able to stay in touch with throughout the years is Vanessa, who I've known since high school. She has always supported me. I thought about going back home since I felt bad, but then my mother started raving about how unappreciative I am. That was the pivotal point. I informed my mother that I needed to leave the house and take some time for myself, so I stopped providing them with any financial help. She made an effort to make me feel bad by claiming that leaving would make her condition worse, but I was adamant about leaving. I offered alternative options, like asking my sister for assistance or hiring home care, but she declined, claiming she couldn't trust anybody else. She then alternated between pleading with me to return home and accusing me in her texts. Her number is now banned by me. Sarah hasn't gotten back to me. Vanessa has volunteered to let me stay in her small flat. Needing evening leisure time without needing to run home to take care of domestic tasks or check on my mother seems odd. This stillness is still something I'm getting accustomed to. My mother phoning for assistance is no longer a concern of mine. It's still a little challenging to find myself again, not only as a caretaker, but for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to feel optimistic about the future. I've been away from home for a month. Vanessa has been a huge help, and living with her was a breath of fresh air. I made the decision to enroll at a community college using the money I had saved up over the years. In addition to English writing, I am presently enrolled in an introductory psychology course. It feels so fantastic to go back to school and learn once again. I was excited and nervous at the same time as I went to class for the first time in years. I was anxious about being the oldest student in the class, and if I could keep up because I hadn't attended school in a while. But my concerns were unjustified. The class had a number of adult students who were close to my age, and some who were much older than me. It's been really difficult to juggle job, school, and family responsibilities, but the stress of social life in this new setting is unlike anything I've ever encountered. It seems like the goal of this stress is to develop rather than merely survive. In order to process my sentiments regarding my family, I have also begun therapy. Speaking with a third party has proven to be quite helpful. She has improved my self-esteem and taught me how to establish limits. We've spoken about why I thought it was normal to give myself up. I met Lynn, my mother's sister, at the grocery store last week. Lynn has been like a second mother to me, and we have always been close. "Why wasn't I returning my mother's calls?" she inquired. I gave a quick explanation of my current predicament. Sometimes I'm pleased that I don't have to bear all the responsibilities alone, especially when my family and job helped me out a little. My aunt once summoned me to a local cafe for a crucial conversation. "Our family members are all aware of the sacrifices you have made over the years for your mother and Sarah, Rebecca. You have been providing for the family ever since you left college at the age of 20. My aunt remarked, "I'd like to assist you." She made the decision to leave me a portion of her estate. Following a number of processes, I was given $50,000. My new life now offers a lot of opportunities thanks to this unexpected help, but I was even more happy that someone finally acknowledged the 10 years of work I had put in. My aunt's assistance has enabled me to begin the process of starting a new life. I've begun searching for a new position. I got employed last week after applying for an entry-level job in the Human Resources Department of a nearby nonprofit. In addition to providing prospects for professional advancement, the income is somewhat greater than my current position. Above all, the work is fulfilling and fits with my interests. As I continue to keep an eye on my circumstances, I am generally cautiously hopeful. In addition, I've started hiking again, something I liked but hadn't had time for years. I know I have a long way to go. Rebuilding my life and untangling the years of codependency will take time, but I'm resolved to go forward constructively no matter how challenging it may be. I'm learning to trust myself and my decisions, even in the face of difficulties. Significant changes that are very different from the past have resulted from this. I managed to find the fortitude I needed to make these adjustments. This has been influenced by my strong interest in psychology, and for once, I would like to work in an environment where my efforts are valued and acknowledged. My classes at the community college are going well, so I'm continuing. I'll get my associate's degree next year. I also intend to move to a 4-year institution in order to obtain a bachelor's degree in psychology, with my aunt's help. Although juggling employment and school is difficult, I am approaching it with greater determination than I have ever had. I feel more a part of the family, friends, and community since I live with Vanessa. I try not to think about the difficult moments too much. I'm learning how to deal with these feelings and set healthy limits with the support of my therapist. After graduating, Sarah relocated to begin her new career. In a message, she expressed her desire for me to continue succeeding even while she is away. Her message went unanswered by me. That our relationship could never be what it was makes me sad. I acknowledge that I have to accept the change, but I also recall our intimate moments. I had hoped that we would get the chance to speak in the future, but that unexpectedly happened sooner than I had anticipated. We got together again before my sister moved away. When I first arrived, I thought about leaving the room, but I eventually made the decision to stay and hear their side of the tale. The mood was uneasy, and it was really strained at start. Compared to what I recalled, my mother appeared older and more worn out. For a while, remorse tortured me, but then I recalled why I had left home in the first place. My mother eventually opened up and appreciated the help I had given her as the evening wore on. She said that she was terrified of losing me entirely, and that she had taken me for granted for a long time. She said that she is learning how to put herself first in the future without being self-centered. There are still difficulties. I'm still learning how to properly strike a balance between my personal wants and empathy for other people. I'm attempting to forgive my family without letting them take advantage of me again. Although it's a process, and I anticipate both good and terrible days, I believe I am headed in the right direction generally. For having the guts to make these adjustments, I am proud of myself, My Aunt Lynn informed me about my mother's hospitalization 3 months after I moved out. It was evident that she could no longer live alone as her autoimmune condition worsened, and she was sent to emergency treatment. Her health has gradually worsened since my departure. She had trouble managing home chores, had trouble recovering on her own, and frequently failed to take her morning prescription. She said she couldn't trust meals made by others, and that she had trouble shopping even at the local grocery, so she declined meal delivery services. She wasn't eating right, and eventually there was nothing left in the refrigerator but rotting food. She was forced to admit that she needed home care after being admitted to the hospital. She grudgingly agreed to my aunt's arrangement for home health attendants and a social worker. My sister Sarah sent me an unexpected message at this time. "Rebecca, I need to talk to you. When you have a moment, might we talk on the phone?" She informed me over the phone that our Aunt Lynn had told the entire family about my 10 years of commitment and the current developments since our mother's illness began. Sarah appeared unable to handle my leaving college to work full-time to support her, her schooling, and her remarks at the graduation celebration, particularly the scathing criticism from our cousins Megan and Tiffany. Their statements were significant since they were of the same age and had been good friends with Sarah from their time as students. "How could you call your sister a loser and say such things about her after she gave up her youth for 10 years? How could you not see that your sister was the reason you had such a great time at college, Sarah?" Sarah appeared to really regret her conduct in the face of family censure and the fact that our mother was in the hospital. "Rebecca, I truly apologize. I was a total idiot, ashamed of my own background, and I wanted to be accepted in my new setting. I fooled myself into believing that my achievements were entirely my own doing and weren't based on your sacrifices. I realize now how cruel and self-centered that was," Sarah remarked. She stated she wanted to consider what she could do for our mother's care, and that she would take a plane back for the weekend. She even volunteered to set aside a portion of her pay to cover our mother's care costs. I haven't come to terms with Sarah's abrupt apologies yet. It will take time to ascertain whether her words and deeds actually demonstrate her regret. "Rebecca, I want to take some time off to meet and talk in person," Sarah said. I gave it some thinking and decided to have a little weekend meeting with her. When she came back, Sarah looked a little slimmer than before and was waiting at the cafe. "Rebecca, I sincerely apologize. I didn't know how foolish my behaviors were until I was pointed out by others. Please allow me to use a portion of my monthly pay to cover the costs of caring, even if we are separated. Additionally, I'll check in with Mom a few times a year on my extended trips and maintain regular online communication with her." Although I didn't think Sarah was lying, I wasn't sure I could trust her right away because of my prior experiences. Would the promised monetary assistance and consistent communication actually materialize? I'll keep an eye on it. I get information from Aunt Lynn about our mother's status from time to time. She was first perplexed, but she has apparently acclimated to the caregiving service over time, and she gets along well with the assistants. Even though I'm not ready to see her yet, I feel more at ease knowing that she's getting her life back on track. Our family has undergone the required modifications as a result of Aunt Lynn's activities. Only time will tell if these improvements are real, though. For the time being, I'm concentrating on my career and education while closely monitoring each family member's performance of their duties from a distance. I've made the decision to put my happiness first and follow my own route in life. I'm trying to strike a healthy balance with my family.
I was 10 years old when it occurred in the spring. Our family would always remember that day. On a Sunday morning, my father was preparing his signature pancakes. My mother's singing as she laid the table produced a reassuring background music, while the pleasant, aromatic scent filled the air from the kitchen to make me laugh. My father had a talent for creating pancakes in the shapes of stars and bears. Our family routine was centered around spending Sunday mornings together. My father was being his typical upbeat self that morning, brandishing the frying pan like a magic wand. He jokingly said, "Your special pancakes are ready, Princess Jean." I hurried to the kitchen, leaving my beloved stuffed rabbit on the couch. I had no idea that the subsequent incident would permanently alter our family. The spatula clattered violently on the floor as my father suddenly grasped his chest. Time seemed to have stopped at that very moment. My father screamed without making a sound, and I watched his face twisted in agony. I stood still as my mother, trembling, snatched up the phone and called for an ambulance. I recall staring blankly as my father was taken away by ambulance. The air reverberated with the siren's roar. I can still clearly remember watching my mother break down in sobs in the white hospital corridor. My father died that day from a heart attack. We didn't have time to be ready since it happened so quickly. There was an eerie stillness in the home after my father left. Our house was once full with laughter and the delicious scent of pancakes, but now it was empty. Despite her anguish, my mother made an effort to help me, but she was also overcome with a deep feeling of loss. My mother met Solomon, her new companion, around a year after my father's passing. Solomon's eyes were sweet and loving, and he was tall. He gradually filled the emptiness in our hearts and became a reassuring presence. He reminded us of my father in his comforting warmth, and they met through a widow's support group. The mood gradually changed when Solomon began to visit our house. He listened to me while I was having a rough day at school and helped me with my arithmetic assignments. Nevertheless, it took some time for him to be welcomed into our family. Solomon eventually moved in with us a few months after my mother made the decision to be married again. We were blessed with a new life around the time Solomon joined our family. It's still very vivid to me the day my mother said, "You're going to be a big sister." Her eyes glistened with anticipation. Yet as our family became a new shape, my heart was awash with conflicting feelings. The days my father spent with us seemed more and more far away. My mother's whole focus shifted to that small new presence when my little sister was born. She made the decision to leave her career in order to focus entirely on taking care of my sister. This early childhood period is so crucial for a child's development, she frequently stated. However, such remarks seemed to me to be a declaration that I was no longer valued in our family. My everyday life progressively altered as my mother got fully involved in caring for my sister. There was no lunch ready when I got home from school, and my mother's ears were solely trained on my sister's tears when I talked to her. My mother would frequently hold my sister as she ate at the dinner table, making me feel as if I wasn't even there. "Jean, do you know sometimes people become so absorbed in one thing that they forget about everything else?" One evening after supper, Solomon informed me. Although I felt somewhat relieved after hearing his statements, my position in the family still felt precarious. As a result, after losing my father, our family struggled daily to find a new way to be together while battling feelings of loneliness and internal turmoil. Our home changed when Solomon joined the family and my sister was born, but I wasn't always comfortable with this transition. My mother progressively lost interest in me as she focused all of her energy on taking care of my sister. I got the impression that I had lost my significance in the family. Solomon made a concerted effort to keep the home in balance. On the weekends, he would take me to the park and go to school functions. Nevertheless, a tiny seed of loneliness grew inside of me each time I witnessed my mother so consumed with my sister. Over time, the seed developed gradually. Sometimes my mom would say, "This time is so important for her future." The remark "for her future" sounded like a rejection of my present, even though I knew she wasn't lying. Solomon knocked on my door one evening and spoke to me in a low voice. "Jean, I recognize that you feel neglected, but know that you are valuable. Please remember that." To me, his words were like a lifeline. I still felt like I was losing my position in the family every time I witnessed the unbreakable love between my mother and sister. Solomon made an effort to support me, but the environment at home was a little tense because of my mother's constant attention to my sister. The distance between my mother and I gradually widened. I can very clearly recall the day my sister called me Mama. When my mother heard it, she cried with happiness and gave my sister a hard embrace. I had an odd mixture of joy and sorrow as I saw the scenario. Even though I was watching from the outside, I had the impression that I was a member of the family. I started to feel as though I was being pulled farther away from the center of the family as I saw my mother's love for my sister grow stronger every day. During this period, the feeling of loneliness began to grow inside of me. My mother's expectations for my sister only increased as she matured. Our family's days were centered on her hectic routine of signing up my sister for art and music classes. When my mother spoke to my sister, her voice was always soft, and she exaggeratedly rejoiced at even the tiniest of her accomplishments. On the other hand, my mother would only say, "That's nice," before swiftly turning the discussion back to my sister whenever I told her about my accomplishments at school or in club activities. Regardless of the situation, Solomon never left my side. He paid close attention to what I had to say and occasionally gave me encouragement by remarking, "You're really putting in a lot of effort." How much those words rescued me is beyond words. The loneliness I experienced within the family may have destroyed me if it weren't for him. But even with Solomon's best efforts, my mother and I continued to grow apart. I had the impression that I was just a satellite circling my sister, who was the focal point of the family. The older I became, the more intense this emotion became. Although our family seemed to be harmonious on the outside, I was experiencing a growing sense of loneliness as minor irritations built up inside of me. Tension started to develop between Solomon and my mother at the same time. Solomon made an effort to keep the family balanced, but he also began to wonder why my mother was giving my sister so much attention. During supper one night, my sister refused to eat and pushed her dish away. In an attempt to convince her, my mother calmly sat next to her and said, "Just one more bite." "Sally, you need to let her become more independent," Solomon murmured, setting down his fork as he watched this. "You are unable to assist her in every way." "Are you saying I'm a bad mother?" my mother said, her features instantly tensing up. "That's not what I'm saying, but she's not the only child in this family," Solomon said coolly. "Jean is also your daughter." But it didn't appear like my mother heard those words. "She's still so young," she shot back, forceful. "She need extra attention." Somehow, everything calmed down, but Solomon's remarks really stuck with me. Solomon kept trying to help me, day by day. He recommended that I take a karate lesson one day. Solomon drove me to and from the session many times a week after I agreed to his idea. I found solace in the chats we had on the drive home after practice. I vividly recall how Dad yelled more than any other parent when I won a belt in a match. The strain at home kept rising even as I developed throughout my time with Solomon. Solomon advised my mother to lessen her reliance on my sister, but rather than hearing his advice, my mother grew more defensive. Solomon responded to my sister's desire to pursue Little League by saying, "This could be a great opportunity." But my mother brushed the notion aside right away. "Baseball poses too much risk." She maintained that it would be safer for her to go to art courses instead, which left Solomon stunned. My sister didn't show much interest in the art class she was assigned, and she quit going after the third session. My mother only blamed the instructor after learning about it, claiming that the teacher doesn't understand children's creativity. Everything in our household appeared to be distorted by my mother's attitude. Solomon eventually stopped arguing with my mother, but it wasn't because he caved into her. Rather, he put his attention on helping me. "Jane, you always put up a lot of effort. Are you aware of how incredible that is?" His encouraging comments are firmly ingrained in my memory. The loneliness in our family may have destroyed me if it weren't for him. However, the rifts in our family were getting too deep to mend. Despite his best efforts on my behalf, Solomon was unable to repair his connection with my mother. The amount of time our family spent together started to decline after this. We started eating supper apart more frequently. My sister was still the focal point of the family, and Solomon and I continued to feel like separate beings circling her. I knew that I wanted to leave the house and live on my own by the time I was ready to graduate from high school. I was so tired of being alone and having a tense relationship with my mother and sister that I really wanted to go to college and start over. My mother didn't seem to care that I was going to college. She would only discuss my sister's teachings and school activities when I was selecting schools. Even when I asked her what she thought would happen to me in the future, she would just respond with a blunt "go wherever you like." However, Solomon persisted in encouraging me. "Jean, the possibilities are endless." He encouraged me, saying, "Go wherever you want." All I could do was rely on his words. Wearing my cap and gown, I stood on the platform on my high school graduation day, gazing out at the crowd. Solomon was grinning at me with pride. My mother was behind him, looking at her phone as if she were messaging my sister's babysitter. That scene seemed to represent my place in the family. With a folder in his hand, Solomon summoned me into his study the day following the commencement ceremony. In his own words, "I've been saving bit by bit." He showed me pamphlets from many colleges. "You may travel any place, Jean," he said. "I want to help you shape your future." I started crying at what he said. My mother, however, became enraged with Solomon after learning about this and claiming that funds need to be allocated for your sister's future. Solomon said to me that evening, "Jean, I'm not going to back down. You are entitled to your liberty." His remarks inspired me to enroll in college. Ultimately, Marshall University in West Virginia was my choice. It was a place where I could begin a new chapter in my life while keeping a healthy distance from my family. I experienced independence for the first time when I started college. I came to appreciate the value of having my own time after being released from my family's shadow. I put a lot of effort into my education, spent time with friends, and followed my life's dreams. However, I became more and more estranged from my family. I seldom ever heard from my mother, and the only communication I had was with Solomon over the phone. Solomon said, "Jane, your mother still seems busy with your sister." During one of our phone conversations, he went on, his voice tired. "She's doing her best to raise her, but that doesn't necessarily mean things are heading in the right direction." I was at a loss for words to answer. I had a different viewpoint after moving away from my family. I was in the process of mending previous wounds and realized my own value. Simultaneously, I became aware that my family's issues were developing beyond of my control, leaving me with conflicting emotions. A major incident that rocked my life a few years after I graduated from college was Solomon's unexpected death. He was the only member of my family that genuinely sympathized with me and helped me. His passing devastated me, but more than that, it became clear how utterly our family's equilibrium had collapsed. Solomon had been the main provider for my mother, so after his passing, she started to have financial difficulties. Without him, our family was on the verge of disintegrating. My mother became dependent on me and insisted that I contribute to my sister's college expenses. With tears in her eyes, my mother begged, "Jane, please, her future will be ruined if you don't help her." Her remarks made me shudder, but I couldn't readily agree given my former connection with my family and the life I had created for myself. Ultimately, though, I chose to grant my mother's request. In order to cover my sister's education costs, I started working 3 jobs at once. I was physically and psychologically exhausted from working from dawn to night. Yet my mother and sister seldom ever expressed thanks. My sister didn't seem too interested in the money, and my mother took it as a given. My heart was further scarred by their icy demeanors. I went back to my family's house one day after a lengthy absence and discovered it in worse shape than before. Solomon's once maintained garden was overgrown, and my sister's possessions littered the living room. I could hardly see my mother as she sat on the couch, muttering, "Welcome home." When I saw this, I understood that no matter how hard I worked to provide for this family, I would never be recognized. The time eventually arrived for my sister to graduate from college and start working. With a joyful expression on her face, my mother purchased a new frock to attend the graduation ceremony. But below that happiness, I felt like all of my hard work had been in vain. My heart was left with a huge hole in it. Since Solomon was gone, My mother and sister had taken up all of my family's attention, making my presence less and less important. It was difficult to endure, but I couldn't give up on my own life. A few years after Solomon's death, when I had been helping my sister pay for college, a major schism in our family arose at my mother's birthday celebration. On the surface, the gathering of family and relatives that day seemed to be cheerful. My mother was in a good mood, drinking wine after wine and talking more than usual. She laughed and continued, "Actually, I've made a will to leave all my assets to your sister," a casual admission she made during the gathering while intoxicated. It seemed like time had stopped when I heard those words. It was as though I had been totally removed from this household. Without displaying any regret, my mother said, "Because she has her entire life ahead of her," when I attempted to inquire why. "Aren't you already self-sufficient?" Her statements were devoid of any appreciation or regard for me. They only expressed her ideals, which put my sister first. All of my suppressed feelings suddenly surfaced. How much I had given up to provide for this family, spending time and money to ensure my sister's future. However, the fact that I was abused in this manner filled me with unfathomable grief and rage. When I got home, I gave it some serious thought. Should I still serve as this family's lamb of sacrifice? What use did it serve to keep up ties with my sister and mother? I gave it a lot of thought before deciding. I had to go away from this family and take back my life. I wrote my mother a letter a few days later. It was a simple communication, politely outlining my reasons for separating myself and stating my determination to stop providing any more help. "Please don't assume that I've done everything," I wrote, putting all of my feelings into the line. "I have the right to live my own life." I also made sure the house where my mother and sister resided was registered in my name and made the decision to sell it. My relationship with the family was finally severed with this behavior. Actually, my late father had bought the house we occupied in my name. My mother had apparently forgotten this. She contacted me right away after realizing she was losing her house, but I didn't pick up. She said, "Why are you doing this?" in her angry and perplexed texts, but I didn't feel compelled to answer. I had run out of excuses to continue sacrificing myself. I made the decision to sell the house and keep the money since I would not be receiving any inheritance. I regarded it as a positive move, even though I was sorry to part with something my father had given me. Luckily, I found a buyer right away, and when the eviction notice arrived, my mother was forced to vacate the house. My life took a significant turn once I severed my relationship with my mother and sister. Additionally, it was the day I was released from the weight I had been carrying for so long. I discovered a peaceful calm inside my heart by deciding to live for myself. It seemed weird to be apart from my family for the first several weeks. The time I used to spend thinking about my sister and mother had vanished entirely for the first time. I created new objectives for myself in order to fill that gap. I concentrated on my job, honing my abilities, and discovering new interests. I came upon a chance to take a photography class, something I had wanted to do for years, when I went by a cafe one day after work. Since high school, photography had been a goal of mine, but life's hectic schedule had caused it to be neglected. Vibrant color returned to my life as a result of the lessons I learned in that seminar. But the regret I felt after severing my familial links didn't go away entirely. My mother occasionally sent me texts. Every time I saw them, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the correct choice. Nevertheless, I believed that the only way I could defend myself was to not respond. I ultimately made the decision to ban my mom's email account. For me, it was a kind of closure. Those who were aware of the situation at my mother's birthday celebration supported me, while other family members chastised me. My mother and sister now appear to be living quietly in a dilapidated apartment and have no relatives to turn to. I wonder how much inheritance my mother truly has left now that I know the property they had resided in was not their asset. It seems doubtful that she has anything significant to give to my sister, as there are rumors that she has begun working part-time. Taking care of yourself is not the same as betraying someone. I began rebuilding my life at my own speed when those words were ingrained in my heart. In an attempt to broaden my social network, I started volunteering and taking vacations with pals on my days off. After several months, I at last felt as though my life had stabilized. Despite its modest size, my new flat felt safe and secure. My new existence was indicated by the plain furnishings and the landscape pictures I had shot in the photography class. I spent an afternoon thinking back on the past, including the aid Solomon had provided me, my attempts to assist my mother and sister, and my tenacity. These were all events that influenced who I am now. There were definitely difficult times in my path, times when I thought I would lose it all. These experiences stayed with me, like scars that told tales of development and survival, and they weren't short-lived. But in retrospect, I saw that these difficulties, however daunting they were at the time, ultimately strengthened me. They helped me become someone who could persevere in the face of hardship and maintain my composure when it seemed like everything was falling apart. I was able to find my own value by using every hardship, setback, and sacrifice I made as stepping stones. I had been putting other people's needs ahead of my own for years, wondering if my work was worth it or if I was worthy of any happiness. However, after considering all that had transpired, I came to the realization that those hardships had not been in vain. One day, I was driving when an unexpected feeling overcame me. A sincere smile began to appear on my face. It was a genuine, deep smile that came from inside, not a fake one or anything ephemeral. It was the type of smile that only appears where the burden of the past starts to fade and tranquility replaces it. I felt as though the weighty loads I had been bearing for so long had finally been removed. I was now free in ways I never would have thought possible since the bonds of duty that had bound me to my family's troubles had been severed. The horizon appeared brighter, the road smoother, and the air crisper. I understood then that all of my hardships, including the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, and the tears I shed, had finally paid off. They had guided me to this place, where I felt free and at peace, something I had previously believed was impossible. I no longer had to deal with their problems, the ones that had taken up so much of my existence. For the first time, I could concentrate on myself without feeling guilty or hesitant since I had moved out of their shadows. I was at last prepared to follow my own route, one that was determined by my goals, decisions, and ambitions rather than by the pressure of other people's expectations. This is my new beginning, I said to myself in a scarcely audible but confident and hopeful whisper. The automobile sped ahead in response to my command as I stepped on the gas. The road in front of me went on forever, a meandering course that vanished into the wide sky above me. With its dazzling blue hues, the vast open sky seemed to hold the promise of limitless opportunities and unexplored experiences. For the first time, I wasn't scared of what I may come across on the unknown road. I had the impression that I was peeling back the layers of my past, the suffering, the uncertainties, the sacrifices. With every mile I drove, I was moving on from them, allowing them to go while I concentrated on the future. Moving ahead emotionally, regaining my sense of self, and accepting the freedom I had battled so hard to attain were the goals of my drive, which went beyond simply traversing physical distance. The road in front of me represented the life I was prepared to create for myself. It was more than just a path, a life based on freedom and self-love. Beneath me, the automobile hummed steadily and dependably, as though it too recognized the importance of this trip. I sensed that I was getting closer to a better, more liberated, and more satisfying future with every wheel turn. More than a mere physical getaway, this trip marked the beginning of something significant. I had at last made a decision for myself, and that decision brought me a happiness I hadn't felt in years. I said it again. This is my new beginning, and it reverberated in my head like a mantra. There was an open road ahead of me, endless and welcoming, with a sky so big it seemed to contain every possibility I could think of.